Bob Salisbury.
Hello there, Paul. My story this time is called The Christmas Corpse. My wife and I have both been owners of dogs for many years. We usually have black Labradors, and we have a couple at the moment, fit working dogs that need a lot of exercise. And this story is a couple of days before Christmas a few years ago. It was one of those magical mornings when the whole country is covered in hoarfrost and it had cloaked everything. You know, crystals transform the landscape into wonderful shapes and patterns, and the tussocky grass crackled underfoot as the two Labradors and I began our training exercise. They were working in tandem, that sort of moving from one side of the field to the other and turning together once I blew the whistle. At the edge of the woodland, though, they disappeared, refused to obey the recall command, and then began a duet of deep-throated growling and barking. This behavior was very unusual, reserved for guard dog duties back at home. In the countryside, it was really out of character. Intruder in the woods, I thought, and strode forward to investigate. The dogs were snarling at what seemed to be a pile of old newspapers lying in a ditch. They bounced around, kicking up a huge din in the cold air, clearly agitated, suspicious at what their noses were telling them. Here, sit. Reluctantly, they came to my side, and silence returned to the icy landscape. What is it? I said as I moved nearer to the ditch. Newspapers, now covered in a layer of hard frost, had been spread out across what looked like the size and shape of a body, and the image seemed to shake my whole being. I stood frozen like the land around me for what seemed like minutes, staring, shocked by what I now assume was under the covering. There was absolutely no movement. Better phone the police, I said aloud. Then thought that would be stupid if under the papers wasn't what I feared it was. Looking back, I've tried to work out why the discovery of a body on that winter morning shocked me quite so much. You wouldn't know it now, but I used to consider myself a bit of an action man, rock climbing, rugby, that sort of thing. So why this extreme reaction? I think it was because where I grew up, death was always kept at a distance, with coffin lids immediately sealed and the remains hurriedly moved off to some distant waiting room. There was no filing past the waxy face or the steady throngs of well-wishers, remembering a life lived while waiting for the tea and sandwiches. None of the black humour endemic to many of the wakes in Ireland. I once remember being quite shocked when one mourner, looking at the suntan face of a neighbour who had died whilst on holiday in Spain, said, "Looks like the break did him good." Procedures in my past were more secretive and impersonal. So little wonder that coming across a corpse in the ditch that day made such an impact. Reluctantly, I squatted down, stretched out my arm, gingerly prized up one end of the frozen newspapers, which immediately snapped in my fingers, and peered under. A black leather shoe, an ankle and trouser ends were visible. But in truth, it's difficult to recall precisely what happened next. I remember the clock striking 8 in the distant church tower, a second or so before the corpse exploded upwards, a face and torso bouncing out from the frozen papers like a jack-in-a-box. I have to be honest, I very nearly shat myself, let out a yell that could be heard for miles, and fell backwards into the ditch. With no warning, I was staring into the face of a bearded man, wild looking, terrified. The dogs instantly went onto attack mode, thunderous growls, hair raised, eyes laced with menace, threatening. No, no, the body screamed, covering his face with his gloved hands, cowering from the canine teeth, which now were inches from his face. I scrambled out of the ditch on all fours and managed to call off the dogs. Recovering a little, I said, it's okay, they won't hurt you. He was whimpering, taking in great gulfs of the frozen air, and his whole body shook in alarming spasms. He'd obviously just woken from a deep sleep. I poured a cup of coffee from the flask in my bag and handed it over to him. He nodded and held the offering tightly in both hands, warming his gloved fingers. He was a youngish looking man and at first glance didn't seem like the normal vagrant. Expensive overcoat, good quality shoes, black leather gloves. What are you doing here? I asked. He'd calmed down a little and after a pause began to tell me his story. His voice, educated but hoarse. Apparently, since early childhood, he'd always wanted to make money. Wheeling and dealing had all been a normal part of life. And in his early 20s, when fashion for men was beginning to take off, he rented a shop and began selling trendy men's clothes, imitation Cromwell coats, jeans and boots, bother boy fashion, he called it. The business was an immediate success. Often on Saturday mornings, there were queues outside the shop, waiting for the open sign to go up. Exciting times. He sipped the coffee and then went on. He'd expanded the business rapidly, borrowed money, sometimes from relatives or friends, sometimes from banks. Soon he had a chain of shops across the country. He admitted at times he'd been ruthless and trampled on many as his empire grew to take advantage of this boom time. Old friends and early supporters were left behind as his wealth increased. And his executive mansion and top-of-the-range car announced to the world that he'd finally made it. The crash, when it came, took him totally by surprise. One minute his shops were thriving, the next his styles were deemed cheap and unsophisticated. Sales plummeted, unprofitable shops had to be closed, staff laid off, but still the decline continued. In the end, he lost house, wife, everything, and was left penniless. My luck finally ran out and I was left only with the clothes I was standing up in. I lodged with a friend for a few weeks, but that didn't work out. Hostels are scary places if you're not used to it. So all through the summer, I've been sleeping rough. Where are you heading now? I asked. Don't really know. Christmas is not a good time for the homeless. Why don't you come with me for a bite to eat and a glass or two of something? Thanks, he said. The man got slowly to his feet and followed me and the dogs across the crackling meadow. No doubt he was thinking of what once was. As for me, I was pondering how quickly things which seemed to be running smoothly can suddenly turn sour. Life can be a lottery at times. Merry Christmas.
Thanks very much, Bob. That was a fantastic story. And actually, Bob, I have to thank you because it was your email that initially kind of made me and Padraig think, oh, maybe we really need to take this online, because as we said earlier, we were in New York. So although we were trying to gauge how things are going, it was kind of slightly more difficult just using various news websites to see what people's attitudes were. So I thank you for that, because it was clearly the right decision.
It's far more pleasurable to be in front of a live audience than in the old days pre-COVID. It was a lot more fun, but well, you have to go with what's there, don't we?
Indeed, we do. There was one line in your story. Your story was fantastic, but I just feel that we should give you your full title, Sir Bob Salisbury.
Right.
And I can't believe Sir Bob Salisbury has just said, nearly shat my pants.
My wife's just, that's exactly what happened though. It was such a shock. It really did come very close, I think, but we don't
Yes.
take the, yeah, I apologize to the audience if it's offended anybody, but we don't take the knighthood too seriously here. I've got three sons and a wife who won't let you do that. And it does sometimes lead to humor though. You know, I've done some short stories for children and I'm asked quite often to go to primary schools to explain about how you write short stories. And I was in one recently where a 7-year-old had his hand up and he kept it up all the way through the discussion. And he suddenly said, my teacher said you've been to meet the Queen. I said, yes. And she made you kneel on a stool. I said, yes. Then she tapped your shoulder with a sword. I said, yes. He said, well, that's what I want to ask you about. And I said, what's that then? He said, do you get to keep the sword? And I said, no, she puts it back in her handbag, keeps it in her kitchen, I think. But,
oh, fantastic.
yeah,
Well, thank you so much. This book, I would say, by the way, say hello to Rosemary. I saw her
Rosemary
milling
sitting
around.
She's there looking the, oh, you perhaps, can you see her there?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Lovely. Hi, Rosemary. So if you want more of Bob and Rosemary, I don't know if this is showing up as mirror.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's Field of Dreams. It's a book about when they bought a bit of land and the house down in Tyrone. Is that correct?
Yes, Tyrone.
And I am going to read it over Christmas. So if any of you want to hear more from Bob, and why wouldn't you? He's brilliant. So Bob, thank you very much and have a wonderful Christmas, you and Rosemary and the family.
Merry Christmas to you.
And to you, Paul. And stay clear of the plague.
Oh, I'll do my best.